Today we're diving into the arguments of this book from 2009, Full Spectrum Dominance by F. William Engdahl. And let me tell you, it presents a really provocative and for many, a pretty controversial take on U.S. foreign policy, one that basically tries to reframe everything that's happened since the end of the Cold War. So the book kicks off by challenging something most of us took for granted. You remember the Berlin Wall coming down, right? That feeling that a whole new, more peaceful chapter was starting for the world. But what if that wasn't the real story? What if, as this book claims, that was just the starting gun for a new and way more ambitious project?
And there it is. That's the central claim, and it is a huge one. The argument is that behind all the talk of peace dividends, a quiet plan was being put into motion for total, unchallenged global power, a project with a very specific and kind of dramatic name. All right, so let's get right into it, starting with the concept that gives the book its name. What exactly is full spectrum dominance?
Now, this isn't just some catchy phrase the author made up. He argues it's a real Pentagon strategy. The goal, the way he lays it out, was to achieve a level of global military and technological power so absolute that no other country could ever hope to challenge the United States. Not on land, not at sea, not in the air, not even in space or cyberspace. Total control.
So, why? What would trigger a plan like that? Well, the author claims that with the Soviet Union gone, the massive U.S. military and intelligence world suddenly lost its main reason for existing. It needed a new mission, a new purpose, to justify its own continuation.
The book frames this moment as a major fork in the road. You know, one path could have been a peace dividend, focusing on cooperation and scaling things back. But the other path, the one the book argues was actually chosen, was to find a new justification to keep the permanent war machine going, and the prize was control over the vast landmass of Eurasia. And a really crucial piece of the author's argument is this promise he says was made. He claims that Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was given a clear assurance. If you let Germany reunite, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, will not expand 1 inch eastward. The book argues this promise was the cornerstone of the deal, and that it was almost immediately broken. The first weapon in this new strategy, the author argues, was economic. A policy called shock therapy was pushed on the old Soviet economies. What that meant in practice was a chaotic fire sale of state-owned industries. This created a whole new class of billionaire oligarchs, and as the book points out, it led to an absolutely catastrophic collapse in living standards, with the life expectancy for Russian men plummeting to just 56 years. Okay, so from the economy, let's move on to how this strategy evolved into, well, what the book calls a whole new kind of warfare. One that looked like a grassroots democracy movement, but he claims was actually something else entirely. The author lays out what he calls a repeatable, 4-step playbook for changing governments. First, you fund local groups, these NGOs. Then, you train young activists. Next, you use international media to question the legitimacy of an election. And finally, you get the trained protesters out onto the streets, making it all look like a sudden, popular uprising. And according to the book, this playbook was put into action with incredible speed and success in the early 2000s. You had Serbia in 2000, which the book calls the prototype. Then Georgia in 2003. Then Ukraine in 2004. One after another, governments that weren't aligned with Washington were toppled in events the world saw as inspiring democratic movements.
So this all raises a really big question, right? Why? Why this laser focus on Eastern Europe and Central Asia? What was the ultimate strategic prize here? To get the answer, the book takes us way back to this 100-year-old idea from a British geographer named Halford Mackinder. The theory is actually pretty simple. Whoever controls the resource-rich center of Eurasia, the heartland, is in the best position to control the whole world. The author's argument is that this old imperial blueprint became America's new grand strategy. And this map is how the book tries to visualize that theory in action. It shows the step-by-step expansion of NATO eastward, effectively surrounding Russia. From that geopolitical point of view, this isn't just a defensive alliance growing, it's a direct move to control that crucial heartland. The book then applies this idea to specific events, like the 2008 war in Georgia. The general view was that it was a complicated local conflict. But the book argues it was really a calculated fight over a key oil pipeline, one that was specifically designed to bypass both Russia and Iran, cutting into their control over the region's energy. And this is where the author really tries to connect the dots for you visually. You put the map of the fighting next to the map of the energy pipelines, and the book's argument is that the military conflict lines up perfectly with the route of that strategic pipeline. So you add it all up, the NATO expansion, the color revolutions, the fights over pipelines, and the crucial point the author makes is that by the mid-2000s, Russia was convinced it was facing a new, undeclared war. And the book points to this one moment, this 2007 speech by Vladimir Putin, as the moment it all spilled out into the open. It's framed as Russia publicly drawing a line in the sand and directly accusing Washington of trying to create a unipolar world run by force. Then there was the whole issue of the U.S. missile defense shield in Europe. Now, the public line was that it was to protect against rogue states. But the book argues its real purpose was offensive, to achieve something called nuclear primacy. That's the ability to launch a nuclear first strike against Russia without having to worry about them being able to strike back effectively. And this strategy wasn't just about Russia, not by a long shot. The author points to data like this. Look at that jump. A 1,400% increase in U.S. funding for democracy promotion in China. The argument is that the same playbook of internal destabilization was being prepped for America's other big rival in Eurasia. So if you boil it all down, the book's core thesis is that full-spectrum dominance is basically this three-pronged strategy. First, control the energy routes to choke off your rivals' economies. Second, surround them with military bases and alliances. And third, use democracy promotion as a tool to stir up trouble from the inside. And that brings us right to the end. And the big question the book leaves you with. It laid out this whole theory based on events up to 2009. The question for us, today, is how well, or maybe how poorly, does this controversial idea work as a lens for understanding the very complex and very turbulent world we've all lived through since then?